Hi guys, good morning. Welcome to our third class of the series around release management. We're just going to give it a couple moments for people to trickle in, and then we'll get started. All right, guys, let's get started. As in the previous sessions, let's start with a couple of housekeeping messages. You will be muted, but don't be afraid to raise your hand and I can give you some time to speak. If you'd rather not speak up, don't worry. We do have a Q&A section where you can ask your questions. And lastly, this will be recorded and you'll be sent a copy of this recording tomorrow. For the ones that don't know us by now, my name is Shannon Moerland and I am the Demand Generation Coordinator here at Prodly. And as in the previous sessions, Derek Black is going to walk you through release management today. All right, take it away.
So thanks for joining us today. This is our third presentation in a series of DevOps for Salesforce courses. So some of you made it to the previous two sessions we hosted in March, and if that's you, you're brave, and extra thanks for powering through everything. The previous sessions were on governance and environment strategy. So I'd like to quickly recap those topics before we move on to release management. Our governance conversation was focused on how to set up a governing body, so like a center of excellence or something like that, and rules for change management in Salesforce. Without changes and ways to track them, there's no real hope in DevOps working at all. So governance will dictate the basics of release management, like when releases are performed, the needed levels of testing, and who or what technologies will be used to move the changes to production. Environment strategy, also super relevant to release management. Without guidance on where to do work and methods for effectively setting up sandboxes, you don't have releases, you have messes. Environment strategy will give you and your Salesforce team flexible, rich, using starting points for getting their work done. These two components of DevOps will set the table for today's topic of release management. So here we are. Release management is simultaneously an easy to understand concept and an often difficult practice to execute. So it's like that practice in theory being at war all the time. So you've made some cool new stuff to share with your end users, and now you just have to safely deploy it to them. The best practice here is to package tested, approved new work into packages that are deployed by a release manager to production. So that's the basics of release management. It's pretty easy to say that you're going to monitor and put together things that work to be sent to production. Throughout this course, we've been talking about application lifecycle management, or ALM, as well as DevOps. Release management is relevant to just a small part of ALM, but is a crucial central part of DevOps. It comes into play after work has been completed, and more importantly, past unit testing. The most challenging part of best-in-class release management is building your release packages. If this is done with a lot of thought and care, the deployment becomes the simple part. So, a lot of people are spending a lot of time putting together change sets or putting together, CSVs for data loads, things like that you're doing to set up environments and push things to production. If you have a really good process and understanding of what needs to go into the release, that becomes the easy part and not really the tricky part of finding all the moving parts. If you're on top of packaging the releases, you know all the parts that you need before you have to go and move them and find them. So if you're finding deployment to be the most difficult part of this, you're likely not building release packages with like the care or rigor that you need to do to make deployment smooth. And we'll talk a bit more about that later. So like on this image here, you can see that, we have like package release, and then we move into integration acceptance testing, and then release to production. You might have some cycles where you do multiple pushes up to multiple integration and acceptance testing orgs or environments, whatever we want to call them. So you might have multiple cycles inside of this red box before you actually kick to production as well. So what is a release? It may seem simple enough to explain what a release is. Probably most people have like their own conception of what that is. I fit it nicely into this 2-sentence description above here, but let's break down what these 33 words really mean. Release consists of verified changes. This means that a full understanding of what has changed, why it has changed, and how that change works is accomplished. You know that, what's been put into an environment and moved to your staging org has everything that you need to, be successful when it finally finds its way into production. So to get an understanding of this, you'll need to lean on governance practices of the following things. You need to have well-defined and documented work items. You have to have test plans for ensuring the changes accomplish the goal of the change. Having test plans for ensuring the changes don't break a bunch of other stuff. So not only do you need to do unit testing, you have to do regression testing. And you have to have configuration changes fully documented. By doing that, you can link the changes to specific requests and combine them into a package for a release. This release may consist of changes from a single work item being completed or from many related dependent items. So it's important to understand and document in totality what configuration changes are part of a release. This rigor is standard in software development, but widely lacking in practice across Salesforce organizations. The best that most organizations are doing is to build some change sets, and maybe half or 1/3 of those organizations don't really have full documentation of the changes before they're put into a change set. If you've ever had a change set fail a validation or not contain a dependent item, you're probably falling victim to not appropriately planning releases. So using a tool like Prodly to view differences between orgs can help this problem by being able to find everything that is different in the development environment compared to the destination. Documentation can be generated and the pieces of work will not be missed. It can also help you pick apart changes that actually work, things that have passed testing versus items that did not pass testing. Tying the noted changes back to the initial request or work item helps more than just auditors. In addition to having a nice compliance trail, it gives a starting point for admins and sometimes end users to understand how to make most effective use of the changes. So in an admin use case, they can go read documentation of what someone else on their team is doing, or try to figure out, what was that crazy thing I did 4 months ago that I don't really remember how I made it work. Having all this documentation tied back to your user stories or work items that we talked about in the governance session allows them to understand and do things faster. And then at the other side, people that are doing enablement or training for your end users can use this documentation and understand the expected behavior, maybe the UI changes or something that would be a part of this, and help develop training material or explain best practices of how to use your Salesforce environment. So in total, a release is the end result of a well-planned process where all the cool, great things your admins and developers are making come together, and they make your end users' lives better. So finding all the things that are there, giving them all a big green check mark that all this stuff works and it's going to be great when it lands in prod. That's what a release is. So it's not necessarily going to make a change set and clicking through a whole bunch of pages and hoping you find all the right fields, all the right page layouts, all the new different flows or process builders, Apex, that type of stuff. You need to know before you kind of get to that level of what you're doing. And a lot of people are using things like spreadsheets to put in every single little thing that they change, which is nice. It's very time consuming, and that type of level of effort needed to do documentation without tooling in place is why people kind of skimp out on this, and they have all these failed change requests, or validations fail when they're pushing a change set. So after you've packaged your release, as we discussed in the last course on environment management, each phase of development should have its own dedicated environment. And best-in-class companies are using feature branch orgs, meaning one scratch org or developer org per feature that needs to be created. If you're not quite there yet, best practice is having at least a dedicated environment for each person on the team. This allows them to, have segmented changes and understand that in this dev org, the only things that are different are what I've been working on recently, or they're only things that are pertinent to one type of project that I'm working on. And you can evaluate the impact of that a lot better if it's all segmented out and you're doing things in a more iterative process and pushing into this package release environment. Release management is how we move our work up the release path into production, and then also sync new work back down into lower level environments. By having well-defined package releases, you can predictably and repeatably move changes in any directions. This helps you ensure that you're getting the best crafted enhancements in production, as well as sync back to environments with incomplete work. So this will allow your admins and developers to always have a clear picture of the impacts of their work based on the ever-evolving state of production. This is where release management and environment strategy come together to get rid of the conversation of this worked in my dev org, but it doesn't work in UAT. By understanding what is being moved to production regularly, and having a mechanism to have everything documented, know what was in that release, you can easily feed that back into your developer orgs at the same time, and everyone's up to date. So this brings us to our first poll question of the day. Are you currently deploying releases to developer environments as well as production?
All right, giving it a few more seconds before I close the poll. I'm seeing some answers coming in.
Yeah, let's give it just a little bit more. Seems like some people have voted.
All right.
The results we're getting here. This is interesting for me to see. So it appears that most of you do have some type of CI/CD process in place, which is great. That's pretty rare actually for most of the Salesforce customers that I'm talking to. It felt like when we shared this poll question that it would kind of the leader would be, yes, sometimes we're doing this. But yeah, it's good to see that a lot of people already have this kind of figured out. So that will help me kind of, talk a bit more to maybe some more advanced concepts in this course, and understand, how we can do more and, help people that have already figured this out, how to take more advantage of what they might have in their CI/CD process. So what's going on here? Here we go. So kind of the next piece of this, well, new work should go through the defined release path. No process is perfect. Bugs will occasionally make their way into production. And when that happens, having a clearly defined hotfix release strategy will alleviate a ton of headache. It's like insurance. You don't want to find out you're not covered after an accident. Crucially, you want to make sure that you have or can quickly create a hotfix environment once the fix is implemented, and then sync it to all of the in-flight orgs and release path. Otherwise, you risk reintroducing the bug in the next release. While a bit of a luxury, it's common practice to have a dedicated hotfix or production support environment. Oftentimes, I see a full copy sandbox being used for this, and that's why I said it's a bit of a luxury. However, if you have a good seeding strategy in place and as part of environment management, you can use a developer org or scratch orgs as just as good replacements for a full copy for this type of instance of hotfix. This makes the luxury a cheap and easy reality, because you can basically on demand use something that costs you potentially nothing, like a scratch org, to identify the problem in production, recreate that immediately in a scratch org, build your patch release, and then distribute that release to all your other environments. So by having this dedicated prod support, you can build hot fixes without interrupting the rest of your release management flow. A production problem can be debugged and fixed in the targeted environment, and those components can be pushed back into production in an isolated hotfix release. So you can, clean up your mess, so to speak, without having to jump back into like a staging org and make changes there, and possibly interrupt whatever the next release that's coming through might have, some things that need to be ironed out as well. So that package release that you made in the hotfix environment can then be shared to lower environments, so it's not lost in future releases. So now that we've discussed all the great things that you can achieve by adding package releases to your environment strategy, let's talk about how you can improve or start your release management process to become best in class. So to kind of move from a Wild West landscape to some basics, you'll need to begin building the package deployments that we've talked about. You'll set established times and roles for these to be tested, verified, and deployed into production. Everything that is in the release package will go through standardized testing. Once these fundamentals are in place, more sophisticated practices can be put on top of them. So when moving into the intermediate level, your Salesforce team will love having their own up-to-date developer environments to do their work. This really only becomes possible if you have a solid packaged releases to keep these environments current. This is the intermediate level, and it's the beginnings of the CI/CD process, or really just continuous integration of being able to keep those developer orgs, in sync. So along with being able to set up and maintain these environments, you can now start to establish long-term and short-term development projects. Since you've already broken away from doing everything in a full copy, there's no need to wait on long project work to get smaller enhancements into production. No more worries about refreshing your pricey full copy sandboxes, because the major units of work are being done in isolated environments. In the intermediate level, you'll be using an SIT, systems integration testing, or merge sandbox to pick up and test and package the changes from your development environments. So it is here where your package releases start to provide their most value. These packages can be promoted forward as well as fed back into development environments, keeping everyone up to date with the latest and greatest build work. Moving into the expert level, we will see more frequent deployments that are managed more and more by automation tools rather than lots of drudge work by a release manager. Best-in-class organizations will have some type of way to back up their destinations for deployment, so they can do a quick rollback if anything unexpected happens. They'll be able to version and automatically deploy configuration data as well as metadata, and often will be using GitHub, Azure, or some other version control system for their releases. The packaging then starts happening in this system rather than inside of a Salesforce environment. With packaging happening inside of a repository, you can more easily manage multiple inputs, which will be coming from all your environment per feature sandboxes. And there are tools like Prodly that can help you automate the regular deployments into production. I see that we did get a question around the hotfix strategy though. How would you test the hotfix if you're deploying straight into production? So you would test the hotfix typically just in that production support or hotfix environment. If you wanted to or needed to, you could push that into a staging org if your staging org is already a mirror of production. Sometimes though, the staging org may have moved on to not being directly synced with prod. So the strategy is to have your hotfix environment already be mirrored to production or already have the components of that production bug reproduced inside of that org. So it does become where you do the testing as well. So there's kind of two strategies there. It really depends on the urgency of the bug and the resources available to you of where you're going to do the testing. So thanks for that question. And back to these three stages here, the beginner, intermediate, and expert. Given these descriptions, where would you say that you're at in your release management strategy today?
All right, we got about 50% of the votes in. I'm just going to give it a couple more seconds.
Cool. So far, this is some interesting responses compared to our last poll.
All right.
All right, so we had 60% of our audience say that they're at a beginner level and 40% at intermediate, which is kind of interesting to me to see that you're rating yourselves there when a lot of people said that they had like a figured out continuous integration, continuous deployment strategy. So maybe a lot of that CI/CD is actually really manual right now or something like that. But hopefully you can use some of this information to maybe, if you're in the beginner level, really just up level from your really good governance framework to starting to do some more things with environment management to take advantage of kind of more best-in-class DevOps operations procedures inside of Salesforce. So we'll move on here to what does kind of best-in-class look like? So you'll have a dedicated release manager. So this is kind of your air traffic control. In a large team, you'll have one or even a couple dedicated people on the team that all they're doing is packaging and moving forward releases. While it may not be someone's job title, someone needs to be doing this work. So there's a lot of like accidental or de facto release managers on teams. The biggest responsibility is building the package releases. So if people are using like Salesforce DX, you can make these great unlocked packages that Salesforce gives you advantage, like the ability to use. Maybe you're just using change sets, maybe you're doing things inside of a repository, but the release manager decides what will be moved forward to production based on what is passing testing. By building these package releases, they can then determine when and where they will be deployed. So that goes into maybe moving just a bit above or falling into that beginner level of release management, where you have scheduled and known releases. As you get more advanced, you can just know potentially that, hey, every night, whatever's in staging is going to be pushed to production. And by having this discipline, this helps with environment setup and sync, and can provide you all the inputs that you need for continuous integration, continuous deployment process. So that goes to our next poll question. I think this might be our last one, or we have two more. Does your organization have a dedicated release manager? All right, someone has a release manager. Some people have release managers.
All right, it seems to be a pretty even split between no and yes. Either there is none or there is an official one. And I'll give it a couple of seconds and I'll close it again.
Okay, great.
Right.
So that is interesting. We kind of have like whatever the opposite is of a bell curve, like it's down in the middle and high in the ends. So that's interesting. The next thing that is best in class, and you've heard me talk about this over and over again through the course, but this is where the most value comes from best practice DevOps. This environment per feature strategy is linked to release management through these 5 steps. Clean developer environments and frequently refreshed testing environments make this smooth sailing. Having tools in place to deploy needed data and metadata make this relatively stress-free. So, starting every new feature in a fresh environment, that's kind of easy because you can just make a new scratch org. You can have a whole bunch of dev orgs that you make on a regular basis to, have clean, empty environments. And then if you are using tools like Prodly, you can seed in all the starting like test data or configuration data that you need to make that environment easier to use. You can then collect features in an integration testing environment because it's easy to build out and verify that everything's good in the dev org if it's really set up and is close to production, or it gives everyone that's working in those all the things they need to do their unit testing right away. You can then build and build a release package of tested and approved features, seed these packages into higher level testing orgs or back into your developer orgs. And then you can align release practices to environment strategy. So it'll support both long-term and short-term projects, kind of like we talked about in the prior session around what Salesforce recommends so that your environment strategy looks like. The other piece of best in class would be automated release management. So as you pick up and perfect the packaging, testing, and environment strategy needed for best in class DevOps, eventually you'll find more and more ways to automate some of these steps. Continuous integration will send approved packages into your long and short-term development environments, and automation can be put in to push configuration data into these environments. Probably customers use us to insert into their CI process as well as their CD process, moving configuration data, or for more the CI piece of that, moving in, starting test data and everything to keep everyone looking and building and testing off of the same set of parameters. It's not people inside of orgs clicking new account, new contact, new opportunity. Everyone has replicas of production data that they can start working on. Continuous delivery is not too terribly different than continuous integration inside of Salesforce anyway. This is where you'll be moving packages toward production. So if you have a true staging environment, your packages can be automatically deployed as frequently as you'd like. I see people, like I referenced earlier, that have a staging environment that potentially gets updates every day and is pushed automatically at the stroke of midnight into production. So by appropriately managing and testing the releases, you can rest assured that what's being pushed will work when it gets there. So if you're following a lot of all these other things, kind of from that like intermediate level, you can then jump into this like expert level where you have automation that is going to say, hey, we've done all of our work. We know that this is high certainty to be perfect when it lands into production, that you can just trust something to pick up the changes automatically and send that package to production. The biggest stretch goal of best-in-class releases is automated regression testing. That said, even manual regression testing and having to establish test plans is largely overlooked in Salesforce DevOps. By being able to establish these plans and execute them with a testing product like Prodly AppOps Test or maybe another thing on the market, you can detect and avoid introducing bugs into production. So if your test plan is strong enough, you can more readily depend on automated deployment releases that pass your tests. You don't necessarily need fully automated testing all the time. You do need a really good regression testing plan. That could include manual tests, but once things are past that testing, the release manager comes in and says, all right, this I know is going to work when it lands into production. You can push that into staging to confirm your deployment worked. And if something is good in staging, then you can have automation be trusted to push that to production because you know that it's good and ready. So kind of looking ahead into our next session, now that we've gone through all of what's best in class for release management, we'll be discussing more detail in the pieces we've hinted at for continuous integration, continuous delivery, and version control. We'll talk about how best-in-class organizations accomplish these components of DevOps on Salesforce. So we'll be talking about source-driven change management, where this version control system becomes your source of truth. It's always going to have the full configuration backup for production that can then be seeded in. That's these arrows that point up straight out of the version control system into your full copy sandbox or your developer scratch orgs that you're using to make sure that they're getting all the components that they need to do work and that they're always up to date. And then you will, of course, push changes from your dev or scratch orgs into the version control system, where a release manager can pick up and make those packages a lot easier inside of one of these VCS systems than maybe Salesforce allows for. There is going to be a new tool that Salesforce is releasing called Salesforce DevOps Center that operates off of this paradigm. It requires you to use a version control system. It then allows you to kind of quickly pick up all those changes through some change tracking that's available in dev and scratch orgs. And from there, you can package your releases that are automatically tied to user stories. So Salesforce is throwing out something for free later this year, Salesforce DevOps Center, that will allow you to start doing CI/CD and version control on Salesforce. And I'm actually going to be doing a presentation with Salesforce Bin here in, I think, 2 weeks. Shannon, do you know the date of that off the top of your head? I'll look at my calendar real quick.
Yeah, it's the 19th of April. And everybody should have received an invite or is going to receive an invite in their inbox in the next couple days. So if you want to join, if you're interested in the DevOps Center, feel free to sign up and join Derek the 19th.
Yeah. So the 19th, the Salesforce Ben presentation will be focused really a lot on DevOps Center, and I'll be doing a Prodly demo of how we help assist with the DevOps Center. The next session for this course will be more high level, just like how do you accomplish CI/CD inside of Salesforce, regardless of what supporting tools that you're going to be using. So, you know, these are kind of our next things. I threw in that Salesforce bin plug. So April 21st, a couple days after I'm talking about DevOps Center, we'll be back here to talk about CI/CD and version control. And then finally, we'll wrap up this course in May with a conversation around testing. And again, we've been offering these free change management audits. So if you want to talk to me directly around, hey, Derek, this is where we're at as an organization. What are some next steps that we could take, or what would you recommend that we work on fixing to get out of that beginner level or move to intermediate? You can set up time with me through this mechanism to do a change management review, and we'll talk through your process, and I can give you some recommendations of what you can do to make your lives easier. I'm happy to do that. And if anyone has any questions, you can raise your hand, we can unmute you, you can ask questions, you can type things into the question panel here. We'll hang out for a little while to see if anyone has anything they want to talk about.
It seems to stay pretty quiet on that front. If anything does come up, if there's anything you'd like us to cover in our next sessions, always just feel free to reach out and we can see what we can do there. Otherwise, if there's no questions, I would say enjoy the rest of your day and hopefully see you in 2 weeks. All right.
Goodbye, everyone.
All right.